I want to welcome everyone here to, I believe this is the third collaboration between Vital City and Columbia Journalism School. And, you know, it could not be a more timely or essential moment for us to have this conversation. And I would like to, as per usual, just start with a little bit of context about Vital City and the journalism school. And so we have collaborated on previous forums in which there were pressing issues, and we thought that it would be important to bring to bear insights of particular people who are part of their extended community. Vital City is one of the amazing outlets, one of the most amazing outlets publishing right now. I technically have to refer to them as a journal. I don't like to refer to them as a journal because that gives you the sense, it connotes a kind of dry, dusty publication that is read by only a few people, and Vital City is exactly the opposite of that. Very much living up to its name, vital, dynamic, and crucial. And so we are here for the discussion of City Hall on the Brink. Against my better judgment, I was tempted to joke that this program will be immediately translated into Turkish to make sure to make sure that everyone is able, for whom this is pertinent, is able to participate. And so I'm just going to introduce and mention our participants, and then I will bow out. Oh, by the way, my name is Jelani Cobb, and I'm the Dean of Columbia Journalism School. I should have said that at the outset. And so we're very happy to have Daniel Richman with us, Dana Rubinstein, Shontell Smith, and my good friend, Jeff Toobin. And I will bow out here, and Harry Siegel, excuse me, and I will bow out here for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Cobb. Thank you, Vital City. And thank you to our panelists. I'm Harry Siegel. I'm an editor at the news site The City and a contributing writer to Vital City. I'm going to be moderating this today. There's a lot to get to. So I think we should jump right in. We've got Dana Rubinstein, who covers New York City politics and government for The Times, and Columbia Law School professor and former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District, Daniel Richman, Jeffrey Toobin, who's a contributing New York Times opinion writer, and Shontell Smith, a partner and the head of the New York practice of Tusk Strategies. Thank you to everyone who's listening, and please put your questions into the chat if you like, and we're going to try to get to those over the next hour and change. Jeff, let's there's so much going on here. Let's start with you. Can you explain what we've all watched unfold legally over these last 2 weeks, starting with the DOJ's move to dismiss the case against Eric Adams? And have we ever seen this kind of thing happen before?
I would like to think that I have the entire history of the Department of Justice at my fingertips, but I don't. But at least as far as I know, I have never seen anything like what has happened in the past 2 weeks. That letter that Acting Deputy Attorney General Beauvais sent, that 2-page letter, was the single most bizarre legal document I have ever read from the Department of Justice. And just to summarize, the gist is, Mayor Adams was indicted for bribery and campaign finance violations in September in connection with his dealings with the Turkish airline and the Turkish government. That case was scheduled to go to trial in April. And as a result of this letter, this 2-page memo, I guess it was more of a memo than a letter, the Justice Department in Washington dismissed the case without prejudice. And I think that's a very important fact, that it was without prejudice, meaning that the case has gone away. There is no more pending case against Mayor Adams, but the Department of Justice has reserved the right of filing it again at some later point. The reason for the dismissal is what makes the case so unprecedented. The Department of Justice said that it's not that the case was legally insufficient. It's not that the case was the subject of prosecutorial misconduct. The reason they were dismissing the case was that Mayor Adams was indispensable to the President Trump's immigration strategy, and the pending indictment was interfering with that. I'll let Dan, start to summarize what's crazy and wrong about all that the Department of Justice did. But Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, if that's a accurate scene setting of the legal situation.
Just a slight correction. The department hasn't dismissed the charges. What it's doing is seeking the dismissal of the
Oh,
charges.
right. Good point.
Which can happen without the judge's approval. So what Bove is now doing is seeking the approval of Judge Ho for what the department would like to be the dismissal of the charges without prejudice. So what's now teed up in front of Judge Ho is the question of whether to accept the department's position and dismiss the charges without prejudice, or to dismiss the charges with prejudice. At this point, maybe there isn't that much room for Judge Ho to make a decision beyond that. It's really hard to get the Department of Justice or to get a federal prosecution going without the Department of Justice. Only they can really bring the case, and we needn't get into questions of how the Constitution works or broad questions of executive power, just to say it's not happening. You're not going to have a federal trial being pursued without the Justice Department involved. And at this point, Bove has removed the Southern District of New York from the picture, leaving the case to be pursued by lawyers in Washington, and they certainly won't be pursuing it without his approval, and they will not be getting his approval. So long and short of it is, we have the Justice Department essentially killing the case against Adam, and we're really looking to Judge Ho to tell us how it's going to die.
If I could just add one point to that, Judge Ho, who was an interesting character in all of this, very new judge, Biden appointee, spent most of his career with the ACLU, has appointed as sort of an outside friend of the court, Paul Clement, who was an extremely distinguished Republican lawyer, to argue, in essence, that the case should not be dismissed because there was a non-adversary proceeding before Ho, because both Adams' lawyers and the Department of Justice wanted the case dismissed, and Judge Ho wanted to hear the other side, the way judges tend to do, and he made the very interesting appointment of Clement, and I guess the next legal point in the drama will be, we'll hear from Paul Clement about his view that the case should not be dismissed. I agree with Dan. It seems virtually impossible for the case to proceed. You can't have the United States against Eric Adams without the United States as the plaintiff, as it were. But anyway, the Paul Clement chapter is next.
So, Shontell, to bring you in here, I got to ask, people have been sort of waiting for some resolution to this, and the trial suggested it would be that Judge Ho is not accepting, the Trump Justice Department's attempt to have the case dismissed, even as, of course, the defendant, Eric Adams, agrees that would be just fine. And that's going to play out, but it's not going to end with anything definitive for New Yorkers. Kathy Hochul has talked a lot about her power to fire the mayor, but sort of made it clear that she's not inclined to do that. There's all sorts of resistance chatter about maybe Attorney General Tish James gets involved, or District Attorney Alvin Bragg will tread where the feds fear to go. Is any of that happening, or are we now back in a circumstance where Adams was going to have an historic trial, the first one ever of a sitting New York City mayor, is ready to run and just make his case to the public?
I think it's a political hot potato, whether the AG gets involved, whether the governor, she basically punted it to the legislature saying, hey, maybe they can pass some legislation. I'm not going to remove them, but let's punt it to the legislature. I don't see anybody touching this at this point. If the courts can't resolve it, I don't think electeds are going to make a decision on the mayor, because this is unprecedented, and I think there's hesitancy, in doing something outside the will of the people. The primary is going to be in what, 4 months? Basically, let New Yorkers decide. Why would politicians get involved in this? You don't win in this situation. There are going to be people of color that feel that you're targeting him because he is a mayor, a sitting mayor that is a person of color. There are going to be people that think that the legislature is overstepping their legislative authority. And also, it's just unpopular. He's already polling not so well. So why do anything and just let the political process play out? Petition has started. Today. So it's like everyone is moving along. Let's just wait 4 more months to see how this quote unquote nightmare ends, basically.
Dana, it was a long journey getting here. And, Eric Adams was he was flying to Washington when his fundraiser got raided, and then flew back and hit the phones. His phone got seized by the feds, and then he forgot his password and bricked the device, which slowed down justice. He stopped mentioning Kamala Harris's name, and started cozying up to Donald Trump. He said he won't publicly criticize him now. Can you just it's a very surreal moment for New York City, and a place that's seen itself as very hostile to one of its native sons in Trump. How did we get here? And it keeps seeming like this can't possibly go on, but maybe it's just going to for a while.
Yeah, we're in a really strange moment. How we got here, I mean, we had a once in a century pandemic. I mean, who knows how we got here, frankly, but this is where we are. And we're about to go into an election season that's going to be really frenetic, and whose outcome is really actually, kind of impossible to determine at this point. I understand that Cuomo is leading in the polls, but with ranked choice voting and the fact that he's held off for so long, announcing that we really the public has not yet had a chance, as it certainly will, to relitigate all the reasons why he was forced to resign in the first place, or pressured to resign in the first place. So yeah, we're in totally uncharted and unpredictable territory, particularly, with Trump in the presidency and his relationship with Eric, and it's highly unpredictable.
Can I just I no one has just said yet, what makes this situation so outrageous, which is that, Mayor Adams is supposed to be working for the city of New York. That's the job of the mayor. But at the moment, the Department of Justice is holding this sort of Damocles over him. They are saying, you cooperate with us or we're going to indict you again. And that's not that seems to me an untenable position for a mayor to be in. That's why people are calling for Kathy Hochul to throw him out. I certainly agree with Shontell that I don't think she will do it. And frankly, with 4 months till an election, she probably shouldn't. But the idea that the mayor of New York is beholden in such a direct way to the United States Department of Justice, which parenthetically is led by an administration that most New Yorkers hate, is a very problematic position for the mayor to be in.
Well,
I just
it's
want to,
go
we
ahead,
live,
Shontell.
like New York City is one of the greatest cities in the world, home of like immigrants. Like what we stand for as New Yorkers is basically the opposite of what we're seeing from the White House. And every day there are chaotic decisions being made by the president. And the fact that like the mayor has been so muted about his response to the things that have been happening on a federal level. We have like Haitian TPS status being removed. $80 million was this clawed from us. And like I got like something on Twitter, like a press statement, like my lawyers are reviewing. This is the mayor who has press conferences over people jumping turnstiles. So for me, for him to be so muted based on this chaotic month that we've had with Trump, Elon Musk, and just what is going on in the city of New York, this is why everyone's like, oh, this is crazy. And he is definitely at the whim of the president. Like,
Just to pick up on Chantal's point about right now and what's going to happen, certainly I completely defer to experts like you about why nothing's going to happen in terms of removing Adams. But what will start getting dicey is as legal moves are made against the Trump administration, who's going to, to what extent is the mayor going to have corp counsel do things that really undercut the interests of New York?
mhm,
Certainly there's going to be deference by a federal judge to the interests of New York, but if those interests are articulated by the mayor, we may not be getting our interests represented fairly. And I saw that the governor was thinking of allowing litigation powers to go to others in the administration. And that might be a really smart move that should be done sooner rather than later if we're just going to limp along to the election.
The
the
thing
problem
is,
is
the
that
governor
people
didn't
are
do that.
running.
Right.
Yep.
I know. She said she might, but she hasn't. Maybe, who knows?
But
She
we have
changes her
people
mind from time to time, I hear.
But yeah, but we have people possibly running from the office of the mayor that she would give litigation powers to. So this is why it's such a disgusting mess right now. Because who? You're going to give it to Brad Lander or possibly, the New York City council speaker who might possibly jump in. So anybody that she would give power to, aren't they conflicted? And isn't there some type of, conflict of interest there?
There's also
Yep.
some ambiguity. I think the comptroller actually can sue via corp counsel. Corp counsel represents all citywide elected officials. I think the idea is that it would just sort of make it slightly easier. But yeah, you look at the inability committee, for example, at least two of the people who would serve on the inability committee, which is one of the other ways that the mayor could be removed from office, are either contemplating or are in fact running against him.
I love the
Adrian
fact
Lander, who else?
I love the fact that New York has an inability committee. I'm sure you all are much more familiar with New York law than I am. I'd never heard of this whole process until this all arose, but it's also, one of the bizarre aspects of this whole story that unlike in most states, there is this possibility that the governor can remove the mayor, which is very strange.
So just for listeners here, a couple of things. The Corp Counsel, the Corporation Counsel, is the lawyer for the whole city. The Inability Committee was Ed Koch had a stroke, and this got created, and it's almost certainly not applicable here, and it's almost certainly unconstitutional. One of its 5 members is the longest serving borough president, and this got created just before the borough presidents had all their power taken away and became ridiculous ceremonial offices people like Eric Adams use to sound very important and run for higher office or maybe to impress foreign donors. Dana, I don't want to ask you to speculate about the future, but let's talk about right now for 1 second. What's the mood like inside of City Hall now? And for, there's 300,000 workers there. all these vital services that have to get provided. Deputy mayors are leaving. There's all sorts of talk about commissioners walking out. Are things still happening? Are people doing their jobs? What's the feeling right now?
I mean, as everyone on this panel and probably in the audience knows, half of the mayor's deputy mayors announced their resignation. Was it last week? I think so. Citing their concerns that the mayor might privilege his own personal interests over those of New Yorkers. They haven't actually left yet. They're staggering their departures, and I don't think we know when precisely their last days are. My understanding is that they're sort of working to protect their staff and, make a somewhat smooth transition. I think that Hochul is expected to have some say in who they're replaced with. The commissioners I've spoken to kind of want to stick around and see what happens next and sort of, continue to do their jobs. A lot of these people are deeply motivated by a desire to serve the city. And amid all the turmoil, my understanding is many want to continue to do so for as long as they can and sort of wait out whatever transition comes.
You know what's sad is that this is like the second wave of senior staff leaving.
Mm-hmm.
The first wave happened right after the mayor was indicted. We lost a police commissioner. We lost the first deputy mayor, Sheena Wright. We lost, the chancellor for education. So right when I think the promotion of Maria Torres Springer was an excellent choice by the mayor, and people were very happy. I know, I think some of the people outside were like, yes, okay. And there was starting to be a sense of calm, and everyone was getting used to this new normal with these sophisticated government staffers. And now the sophistication of the government staffers are now gone. And I think there's a little hesitancy of who will he select, because there were issues with the first tranche of loyalists that he selected to be in his administration. So do you go back to, what is good for you, or do you go to what you're used to and what is comfortable for you, especially in this time where his back is against the wall, he's running for re-election, and he needs people that really believe in him right now. So it'll just be interesting to see.
Question for the attorneys here. I keep reading about the anti-commandeering doctrine, and it seems like a lot of the different issues that are playing out involve what the president can or can't do to coerce local officials to get on board. We haven't mentioned that the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who's kept great distance from everything happening with Adams. They've let this acting number 2 guy, Emil Bove, sort of take the heat. But, she got on camera to say she was suing New York State over driver's licenses. Adams, of course, did a press tour with Trump's border czar, and he's only that. He doesn't have a formal position. That was humiliating. And there seems to be a sense that the feds are demanding local authorities who have sanctuary city laws, who have protections baked in, roll over and do what they're told right now. How is that playing out? And is this going to play out in the courts and potentially the Supreme Court as these issues progress?
It may play out in the courts. It certainly did to some extent the last Trump administration. The short version of the anti-commandeering doctrine is it's this general principle that's been respected for quite some time, since the founding, that states can't be forced to do things by the federal government. There are some wrinkles, but that's basically the principle. Now, they can be asked to do things, they can be recruited to do things, they can be bribed to do things, and that certainly summarizes the history of intergovernment relations in the United States. So with respect to sanctuary cities, a city or a state, if it wants to, can certainly say, we are not going to affirmatively help the administration's immigration enforcement policies. They can't get in the way of them. And one of the things you see in the filings by the Trump administration at various points is a claim that localities have gone over the line. They've moved from refusal to cooperate to affirmative obstruction. You can't obstruct. As memos from the Justice Department kind of loudly proclaimed, it could be a federal crime to obstruct federal officials, and that crime could be charged against even local officials themselves. So the bottom line is, you're not going to have the administration have the constitutional authority to demand affirmative actions by the localities. Now, in the wake of that, a number of things are happening. First of all, many localities are perfectly happy to help. There's a decent amount of cooperation. Yes, the sheriffs want to do it, but they want more money for it, and that will have to be worked out. The Adams isn't being coerced in the traditional legal sense of being ordered by the federal government through the force of law. He's just being extorted. Now, the commandeering doctrine doesn't really get to that. You can argue that to the extent it's actual extortion, it's a violation of the commandeering doctrine. But I think once you can prove that it's actual extortion, all sorts of bells and whistles go off, and you'll obviously expect to see the administration, and already has seen the administration, fighting at all points to deny that there's any quid pro quo to that effect.
Well, and if I could just add one point, another thing the administration is trying to undo congestion pricing, which seems to me like one of the very few government programs that appears to be working exactly as it's supposed to work, and seems to be going well. The congestion pricing required federal approval, and the question now is, can the Trump administration withdraw that? And there's now a lawsuit about that. But it's just another way the federal government is interfering in the operations of the city. And again, as Shontell was saying, you would expect the mayor to be speaking about this. Like, what side is he on about congestion pricing? And he is paralyzed in terms of his relationship with the federal government, because he's being, there's this threat of indictment immediately hanging over him.
Maybe it's because he used to live in New Jersey.
And maybe still does, as far as I understand.
Trump said, "Long live the king, congestion pricing is dead," I believe an hour before Adams had to appear in court before the judge, as Trump's Justice Department was saying, "We've taken up this case and we'd like to see it gone now," even after a grand jury had returned a true bill there. It's very strange, and it sort of points to how many different coercive powers a president has. And this question, weirdly, the mayoral candidates, the other ones, they'd rather talk about Adams, don't seem to want to spend a lot of time on what they would do to defend New York, and what they would do if suddenly there was a lot less money here, which seems distinctly possible. And Dana, you brought up 2021 and COVID. Like, that hardly came up in that race. It was all very weird and surreal. And Andrew Yang is no longer a Democrat. With surge to the front of the field and just a sort of cheerful, "Hey, I'm here and I've got a smile and a nice ad" appeal. All respect to Tusk Strategies. There does seem to be like some surreal space between what the city is about to go through and what its political class is talking about at the moment. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, I think the mayor's race really hasn't even begun, I mean, all the candidates, the declared candidates, with the exception of Adams, have been attending these mayoral forums that no one pays attention to, where they don't say things that make news. Cuomo looms over the whole thing, although he's likely to announce soon. And then there's this sort of question whether Adams is truly in it. Does he have a campaign manager? Does he have an official campaign spokesman? Where is his money going to come from? Who's carrying petitions for him?
He doesn't even have a website.
Yeah.
Right. So There's still just an enormous amount of uncertainty around the whole thing.
And then with that, there have been all these rumors going around about ICE enforcement and what could happen here. And this challenge of reporting on this, a ton of what we know seems to come from like leaks to the New York Post, in which this terrible guy did a terrible thing and is now being deported. And nobody knows how many other people are just getting swept up in these actions. We're not getting any numbers about that. And the mayor, as you all have noted, has just been very quiet about what's happening. It's a strange sort of void. Have we ever experienced something like this before in the city?
Not that I know of. I mean, I think you noted it earlier, but he explicitly said, I think it was last month, that he would not be publicly criticizing anything that Trump did, that he had a back channel to him and he would be using it. And that's what he did when Biden first took office, which, you know, is an interesting comparison, but also slightly an apples and oranges one. I mean, Biden was a Democrat, as ostensibly Eric is, and and all the other contexts that we've been talking about did not exist before. So
And
yeah, there is a void, but you know, Cuomo is also has not been speaking out. Something that one of the other contenders, Elnor Myrie, has been pointing out with some sort of website, which apparently is keeping track of his
silence, yeah.
silence. And there's also like this question, which I've done very little reporting on, no reporting on, about whether, you know, Cuomo has some reason to fear a perjury charge from Trump's DOJ, which might also, because there was a subcommittee which concluded right? Am I getting
Yep.
this wrong?
No, you have this right.
And so, like, will that in any way hamper his ability or desire to speak out? And also just what role his political positioning will be vis-a-vis Trump. I mean, we don't know because he's not in the race yet.
And just real quick, that involved his COVID response. And this was at the height of Cuomo sexuality, before Cuomo MeTooiality and his resignation, when Trump was having these batty press conferences all the time and just trying to dominate the airwaves. And then Cuomo was going on in the afternoon to sound calm and paternal and
And
counter program those, while he was also having his staff write a book on his behalf and a bunch of other stuff. And he's now, if he jumps in, the exhausting early front runner, right? Like there's different polls. There's one showing socialist Zoran Mamdani actually leading the other challengers that came out today.
But I just want to say, like, I mean, since we're talking about it, he does have this is the problem. Under Trump, every day you wake up, you're exhausted by news, whether it's watching it, reading it, Twitter, you're exhausted by all the different actions that are happening on a federal level. So right now, unless someone does something that is out of the ordinary, or it's someone who has name recognition or presence, that's what you're reading and that's what you're hearing about. I think, Dana, you're saying this, like, there have been many forums right now and no one's catching traction. And I understand there's 4 months, there's a lot that's going to happen from the end of petitioning to the primary, but under a Trump universe where he is taking up 75% of the news space, is there really a chance for someone with less name recognition and like less dollars, quite frankly, to really make a statement or do anything in this mayor's race?
Yeah, that's a very good point, particularly with like an emaciated media
Yeah.
environment. You know, I mean, who really has the bandwidth to pay close attention, and how much will it break through?
Ooh. While we're talking about the politics for a second, Adams was calling like some of the county leaders. There's a thing with its own history called the Wilson Pakula, where if you get most of them to agree, you can run on another party's line. Is it possible that we could have a scenario where Adams loses a ranked choice Democratic primary, but is still on the ballot in November? And at this point, is he running to win, or is he running just to keep his seat at the table and maybe see what happens with the Trump administration after that? Like, where are we at?
I think he's running for his life. Like, I don't think he may want to be mayor and he may want to continue having power. But I think right now he needs to keep the power so he can this not have to deal with these charges and deal with the DOJ. So I think right now it's just like he's running out of necessity. basically. And he's saying he can run, and he's saying he can still be mayor, but we've seen over the past couple of weeks that that's not so true. Like, he lost his security briefings. I think that we read, like, these security briefings are very essential to know the threats that are happening. He no longer has, or he hasn't had them ever since he's been indicted. Like, I just question what he can really do, not because he's incapable, but just based on the constraints that are placed on him right now.
Can I add a complicating factor that may have no political significance at this point, but and I don't want to get too much into legalese, but this case against Adams is a bullshit case.
Oh.
This case is about, years separating him getting some hotel rooms and, flight upgrades. And then the big payoff is he calls the fire commissioner and says, come on, can you, approve the building? Something Adams had no control over. And as far as I understand, it's one of the very few things borough presidents do is they try to work the bureaucracy on behalf of, constituents. This is a criminal case. I mean, especially, and again, the Supreme Court has made a complete mess of federal bribery law. It's much harder than it should be to convict people of bribery. Only the unbelievably corrupt senator from New Jersey, Menendez, is, I think, clearly guilty of bribery under current law. But after all the excitement over the investigation of Eric Adams, all these search warrants and Bragg doing an investigation and the feds doing the investigation, this is what they come up with, this thing about flight upgrades and a call to the fire commissioner. I mean, I don't like weep at night feeling sorry for Eric Adams, but I do think, like, after all this is the case against him. It's pretty weak tea as far as I'm concerned.
If I could just make a point of clarification, the indictment also charges him with knowingly soliciting illegal foreign donations and knowingly having them channeled through straw donors, thereby exploiting the city's campaign finance system. I mean, there is more to it than that, and that they also allege that he continued to do this after he became mayor. I have no standing to argue whether or not it's a strong or weak case. I'm just saying it is not merely flight upgrades. It's free and extremely heavily discounted travel, and also not the sort of flight upgrade that supposedly people get all the time. I've never gotten one where you're just at the gate and someone upgrades you. I mean, it was not that.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in to sort of second what Dana was saying, in that it's certainly not the crime of the century. It would pass muster just fine under current Supreme Court doctrine. The office brought a case that was tailored to the doctrine and would survive any challenge. And as to where one ranks this, there's certainly been worse corruption cases. But as Dana was saying, this is a guy who is kind of in the pocket of a foreign government. They didn't ask for much. It was just little stuff. Could they have asked for more? Don't know. I don't want to, we generally don't like to wait to find out on those sorts of things. There have been prosecutions, not just Menendez, but Aquila down in Texas, to really go after public officials who are in the pocket of foreign governments. We ought to take that seriously, and I think the office was right to do so.
Real quick follow-up to all that. Menendez, who's a Democrat, of course, and gold bars in his home because he's Cuban. He went and cried before the judge about how sorry he was, and then went out of court. This is a guy who voted twice to impeach Trump and said Trump was right about everything. Rob Blagojevich, the former Illinois governor, right? This is fucking golden. I'm quoting. About selling the seat Barack Obama was leaving. Trump is pardoned now, and Eric Adams is sort of clearly in that sort of vein. There were all these elements of this case. That building was very important to Erdogan, the strongman of Turkey, and to be there and represent as a show of power at that opening. And Adams had won the Democratic primary, which meant he was a sure thing to be mayor at that point. So his very well-paid lawyer, Alex Spiro, and it's going to be interesting to see, shout out to Bill de Blasio, if and how Adams actually pays him back, has made the case this was the flight upgrades, nothing case. I'm skeptical about that, but my big question here is the Southern District raided, as Shontell mentioned, all these other folks around Adams. The Eastern District has been looking at cases involving China and corruption, and we don't know where any of that is going now. We've had a police commissioner whose twin brother was reportedly impersonating him, who got raided by the FBI, a deputy mayor for public safety, who was put in that role after he'd previously been investigated by the FBI by Adams, who, then got raided again by the FBI and that's all looming in this weird new Trumpy world. Like, are there more shoes to drop, or is all that presumably disappeared right now? Prosecutors have been quiet, but I don't know if anyone on the call has any sense, because there are a lot of loose threads and sort of looming shoes that seem to still be out there.
Looming shoes. I love that phrase. I mean, the only thing I'll say, since like you, I can't untangle all these threads, is that what's happened in the Adams case really sends the message, or at least threatens to send the message to all the people who are being targeted or under investigation, that if you suck up to the president, it will go away. And I think that's right. I'm not, or put differently, I'm not sure it's wrong. And that's a huge problem. And for, Menendez could probably fairly say right now, the only reason I'm in the fix I'm in is because the president doesn't like me. Because if he liked me, I'd join all the January 6th people, singing my way out of jail.
Well, I just published a book about presidential pardons, which which is I think relevant to this story, and I think one of the things we can be sure of now is, whatever federal investigations of Adams were underway on January 20th are not going to produce any further indictments because of the way Adams is now in with the Trump administration. I don't know if any of those investigations you talked about would ultimately bear fruit, but they clearly, I mean, he's not going to be indicted either in the Eastern District or in the Southern District, because the Department of Justice simply won't allow it. I don't know what's going on with Bragg. Bragg has, his own investigation, but we're also approaching the time. It's not a law, but there is this custom that you don't indict elected officials 60 days, within 60 days of an election. What are we for? We're 120 days from an election. I just think that there are no more legal shoes to drop. That this is the legal situation. As the political situation, I defer to the experts. Beats the hell out of me.
So we've got some really good questions in the chat here. Shontell, maybe you can start with this one. I've been wondering a lot about this. If, as expected, Leonard Picker asks, the case is dismissed, does the Campaign Finance Board, and again, the whole case against Adams involves straw donors and phony matching funds and foreign money and all that, have an independent basis to deny funding to Adams, which would complicate things for him, although he has made a lot of inroads with crypto friends.
Yes. I don't know. I've been thinking about this too, because he didn't qualify for any funding because of basically the scrutiny of the donations that he received. So I don't know if there's jurisdiction for them to have an independent basis to deny funding to Adam. Maybe one can make an argument, like, due to the, this like a public call out, like for the safety of taxpayer money, maybe they can deny some of it. I don't know, because no matter what, I think he would bring it to court. I think he would fight any type of independent dismissal. And if there was basis, I feel like smart people like Dana and other people would write about it and would say he can't get money. So I don't know, but that's going to be interesting, because he has no money. Like, he has no money. He owes his attorneys a bunch of money. So I just don't know how he runs in a race where I think Zoran has 2 million, Zellner has 2 million. I can't remember if Lander, I think Scott
Bob.
Stringer maybe,
Mhm.
a bunch of them have received
He lost 4.
funds. So
And Eric Adams, he keeps saying that this was a Jeff. You said this was a bullshit case. I've heard this from other smart attorneys I've talked to. I don't totally agree, but I get that. Eric Adams says this was more than a bullshit case. This was lawfare by the Biden
I
Justice Department, and they were gunning for him. What do you say to that? And then
I
everyone else,
think
please
that's
jump in.
absurd.
I think
I
that's
think that's absurd, and I have too much respect for the prosecutors in the Southern District who brought this case. I mean, I do think it's a marginal case, although I take Dana's correction that the other part, other than the bribery, appears to be a much stronger part of the case. But the idea that this was some sort of payback because Adams was criticizing the Biden administration on immigration strikes me as absurd and not plausible. I mean, I'm sure Adams will make that argument, and the Trump administration, in that crazy memo that Beauvais sent, more kind of adopted that view, but I don't think it's credible.
But that's the view Trump needs for himself and all these, like Trump needs to cast doubt on Biden and DOJ. So of course he's gonna, he has a black Democrat publicly crapping on, Biden and the previous administration. Of course they're gonna use that to their advantage. But to say, I'm not gonna attack the sitting president when he has no problem attacking the sitting majority leader of the Senate, like he attacks when he feels the need to attack. But for Trump, he's not attacking. And Biden is this mastermind. I will say, do I think the prosecutor, Damian, I can't remember his last name,
Williams.
Williams.
Damian Williams, overzealous? Yes. I think he was overzealous, but I don't think this was some coordination with the Biden administration and him to prosecute Eric Adams because he spoke about immigration. I don't.
It's
think that-
also worth noting that the case, as I think Leonard
Started
put in the chat, started in 21, which was before the migrant crisis,
right.
before Eric was mayor, and before Damian Williams was the U.S. attorney.
But Damian Williams, he did do an op-ed for City and State that was super generic, like almost AI'd after he
Generic?
left, but being like, there is corruption and somebody should do something about the problems. That read very much like a political statement. And we at the city appreciated it because it linked to some of our coverage. But this came up in Main Justice and Bove's filing that this was a bad, the timing of the trial was wrong, and that the former head of the Southern, sometimes called Sovereign District, had his own political ambitions. Was that fair at all? Is this back reading? Like, how'd you read that, Dana?
I mean, it definitely raised a lot of eyebrows amongst people I
Mhm.
talked to. I think it's a totally interesting decision. I think there is a theory that he has, electoral ambitions, not in this mayor's race, but possibly gubernatorial, who knows? So yeah, no, I think many people regard it as something of a misstep, but to then take the leap to argue that it is proof of some sort of vast conspiracy is another matter.
He's not the first United States attorney for the Southern District to run for office. You should pardon the expression. Rudy Giuliani was, certainly parlayed being
Yeah.
U.S. attorney into a political office.
But just to supplement what Dana was saying, I think one of the many things accomplished by Danielle Sassoon in her letter was to blow the allegation of Damian Williams' heavy involvement in the case out of the water. She really laid out, her Federalist Society credentials are as glittering as one gets, and she laid out incredibly powerfully how he had even less to do with the case than she thought. Which wasn't very much to begin with. So this whole narrative of weaponization just dissolves on a half second's look.
We have a comment in from Neil Barsky, who some of you will know was the founder of the Marshall Project, filmmaker, other things. Excellent panel. Not to be a second guesser here, but did Bragg's criminal conviction of an ex-president based on the flimsiest of cases, not to mention Tish James' weak civil case, unleash a wave of cynicism about the criminal justice system? In other words, were we Trump critics too silent during earlier prosecutorial abuse? In my opinion, have we been hoisted on our own petard?
So the
Discuss.
criminal justice system was doing absolutely fine until these things happened, and there was no cynicism about it. You know, we've been playing this game of weaponization. The Clintons actually were the ones who dialed it up to a particularly high level when they were being targeted by Starr. And I don't think we've ever receded from that kind of claim that anything involving a public official really amounts to a weaponization of the process.
You know, I covered pretty closely Bragg's case, you know, before Judge Merchan, and you know, I was skeptical about that case before it went to trial. Watching the evidence come in, that case was a bigger deal than it might have seemed just from the nature of the charges. There's a very good argument to be made that you know, keeping Stormy Daniels quiet on the eve of the election is something that got Donald Trump the presidency. That this was a case about election, you know, something of really major stakes. And so, you know, I can't speak about, I didn't cover Tish James' civil case. You know, all I know is the result. But, you know, the idea that the case before Judge Merchan was some sort of confection invented by Trump's enemies I don't think it stands up to the evidence that was presented in court.
Anyone want to argue with that? So this is a fascinating one, and we have three lawyers here. I'm a city employee, an assistant commissioner, and would like to know what rights we have to not execute on Trump/Adams actions, such as allowing ICE into places, turning over data, etc. I think there are many of us who would love to resign like the deputy mayors, but we have a lot to lose in doing so. What are the scenarios and/or players who can resist if Adams won't?
Well, what's the usual line? I don't want to give legal advice. And I certainly, though, the law professor would not want to give granular legal advice for this person. But the general principles are the ones I alluded to. You can't obstruct. You needn't enthusiastically do affirmative actions to contribute to the administration's policy. Will the line drawing be hard? Yeah. You know, for instance, there is a provision requiring information sharing with about immigration data between city and state and the feds. A good argument was made in the Seventh Circuit, which really didn't end up being fully litigated back in the first Trump administration, that that's unconstitutional, a violation of the anti-commandeering principle. Would I, as a city or state actor, want to bear the brunt of a claim that this is unconstitutional and violate the statute? No, I would not do that. I mean, one thing about standing up, though, even under the best of circumstances, it's going to be a delicate time for state and local officials to take positions, and I don't want to even say resist the Trump administration. On one hand, you want to represent your constituents, you want to give aid and comfort to the extent legally possible to the undocumented people in your community. On the other hand, painting a target on your back so that Congress can take funds away from you with at the president's behest is just not a smart move right now. So loudness for loudness's sake, even though it gives comfort to some people, is something that even an unconflicted city or state leader might want to think twice about.
You know, I think that just that question from the assistant commissioner, I think is so meaningful and so difficult because it's not just, that the line between, not cooperating and defying is very hard to draw, especially when you're talking about carrots and sticks here. Because, what about if Trump says, as he surely will say, we are going to withdraw certain funds if you don't do X? Or, I mean, that's a very big problem. And I don't pretend to know either the appropriate moral, political, or legal answer for what to do with city government employees who are faced with those sorts of dilemmas. It strikes me as really hard, and I don't. But I suggesting that the law has some clear answer to these dilemmas, I think is unlikely to be accurate.
Is politics a better sphere for those? Like, we have to resolve these sorts of questions. What's compulsion? What's coercion? What's right? What's wrong? And it does seem like we have the legal avenue for doing that. There's a political avenue. There's the question of whether we should have another emergency. We had an emergency, so Cuomo had to resign, and that made Hochul governor, who came to attention initially as a county clerk who was against giving out driver's licenses, is now being sued for protecting the information in those from the federal government. It seems like these things are getting fought out in these different spheres simultaneously, and that, in my assessment at least, the political one has become dominant. If you have the votes and the will, you can roll things over before the courts can even catch up some of the time. Is that smart people, lawyers? Do you have any perspective on this? Because my head has been spinning.
So you want lawyers to say that law has no role? Look, there have been conflicts before. It gets really ugly every time you think it's really sad, but the precedents for this sort of thing go back to the Fugitive Slave Acts. Resistance by communities to federal impositions of authority, where you have the feds arresting local officials and local officials arresting federal marshals. This spoiler alert, this did not end well.
Yeah.
So, the idea that this can be litigated, there'll be cases, litigation moves somewhat slowly. On the other hand, if something identifiably targetable can be, pursued, you'll get an injunction perhaps. These are judges, local judges who are aware of local realities and might be sensitive to the problems being created. But I'm being vague on purpose because the idea that politics is not the ultimate resolution is false. Politics is or democracies run on politics.
Where some level our judges end up coming from at the federal level is, that they have to get nominated and approved by, the elected politicians. We have one more good question in the chat, and thank you to everyone who's contributed to that, as well as Jerry Skurnick noting that Adams does have about $3 million already, even if he receives no public money, and that isn't nothing. So two now. I'll start with Scott Kaplan. It's an interesting question. Is there something wrong with mayoral candidates demanding the removal or resignation of an incumbent while they're challenging him in a primary? And then it's asking the same question about this inability committee. How should the line be drawn between official functions and campaigning? And as Adams, we've noted, right, has no campaign at all right now. He's just running for mayor by being mayor, I think, in effect. Is that fair, Shontell?
Yeah, I think he's running for mayor by being mayor. But, do I think there's something wrong with mayoral candidates demanding the removal or resignation of an incumbent? It's murky because you may feel that, but there's a conflict. So, I think a majority, actually, I don't know who's actually has taken a stance on this with Eric Adams, like publicly as a mayoral candidate. But the thing is I think you have less credibility, you want to say maybe, or maybe there's desire to really like go forth with these candidates because they're trying to be mayor. So it's just basically, it's not hypocritical, but it's conflicting. And do I think there's a problem with someone having an actual role in the removal, like the inability committee, which there's disagreement if this even applies to him? I do. I do, because I think when you are running for the position and you're saying, hey, let's vote to remove him, it's a conflict. And I just think that people are going to see beyond it. And then you don't know if the actions are based off of your true beliefs or self-interest. But that's my.
And I would just add that, you know, if we look at the history of the relatively recent history of impeachment in the you know, at the federal level, it doesn't always end well for the impeaching forces. You know, I think people do have or at least a lot of people have this idea that if you elect somebody, they really need, you know, they were elected to serve out their term. It didn't work out well for impeaching Bill Clinton. Donald Trump was impeached twice and then got elected again. I can certainly understand Hochul's reluctance. Especially since it's a unilateral power. It's not like the legislature acts. It's not. It's and you know the guy was elected, and he hasn't. And the indictment is, you know, he was innocent until proven guilty, and now the case has gone away, perhaps forever. I just don't think the argument for removing him from office is a strong one, especially, you know, as Shontell said at the very beginning, like the election's around the corner. Why would you do this now?
And Hochul, you know, I fully agree with all that. I've written a bit about it. I think there's an absurdity to this. That said, she has made a great public show
Oh,
of
that.
considering it, which I think if you're not going to do it is embarrassing. We have a question from Vital City's founder, Liz Glazer, that I'd love to just go around the panel with. I think this is a great close that covers a lot. I'm going to throw in one twist. Any thoughts about what happens if Trump pardons Adams now, politically and the broader legal impact? And then she adds, meaning how it chills SDNY going forward on other cases and has a broader impact on how DOJ responds to political directives, and downstream of that, does this maybe change how other local prosecutors handle cases? Do we have like a bidding war between what the feds are dropping and locals are picking up with all of these questions and outstanding investigations, and the Department of Investigation here, which actually began a lot of the case we're looking at, they have their own files. Like, where is all this going, and what are the potential implications for the justice system and New York politics going forward? Daniel, do you want to start us off there?
I'm certainly not going to cover all of Liz's questions, which is obviously the most important question. As to what will happen to Adams politically, I am so outranked by other members of the panel in their political savvy. You know, Dana and Shontell have so much more interesting things to say than I and Jeff as well. But as to his case, I do think it's interesting that DOI has been a pivotal player in this. DOI could give Bragg the ability, should he want to, and I don't know if he wants to get up and running pretty quickly if he wanted to pursue that case, and a pardon would not stand in his way, I believe. Would he want to? Would it be worth it? Totally different question, which might well connect to Adams's political fate. As to sort of what this portends for the Southern District, hard to say. Certainly Beauvais's efforts was intended to be a body blow to assert dominance in some primal way over his old office. Whether that will continue is hard. I mean, the Southern District's independence isn't just based on smoke and mirrors. It's based on forces, whether within the New York legal community or even national, that really have valued a hard-hitting independent prosecutor's office. And I would like to think that those forces will see and even within the administration, will see the value of an office whose morale isn't crippled by thinking that anybody you prosecute can make a call to the president and get the case removed. But we'll have to see.
Yeah.
I think Trump has effectively pardoned Adams already.
Mhm.
And if he were to issue an actual pardon, I don't think it would have much political impact. I don't think Adams would suddenly start raising all the money he needs, that he'd be a stronger candidate. I just think, Trump has weighed in on this case already. On the broader point, I do think we're going to see a lot more political supervision of U.S. attorneys' offices and of the criminal justice system. Donald Trump has discovered that you don't have to wait until the end of your term to start pardoning people. He didn't just do it with the January 6 people. He did it with some people who had been convicted of violating the rights of women who were trying to get abortions. So he used it to ingratiate himself with this pro-life movement. He pardoned Rod Blagojevich, perhaps in preparation for naming him an ambassador somewhere. I mean, he is going to be using this power in his customary transactional way to punish his enemies and reward his friends. And I do think that is going to have an impact on how U.S. attorneys, which customarily had a lot of freedom in in how they conducted investigations, just as these Eric Adams investigations, the ones you were talking about earlier, Harry, are dead in the water because this Justice Department is never going to allow them to continue.
Shontell?
Oh, I mean, I agree with Daniel and Jeff. I think that basically, I think under this administration, I think, federal prosecutors are silenced. And I think, correct, Jeff, that he has essentially pardoned Eric Adams. I would be interested to see if this maneuver is used by Democrats, if there is to be a Democrat that gets elected later on, and how their supervision of the federal prosecutors go after Trump has asserted this power, this administration, this term. But essentially, I think it's the wild, wild west, and people are going to be indicted and charged based on if Trump approves or disapproves, especially if it involves electeds. I think it's going to be based on, Trump's whatever metrics he sets for the federal prosecutors.
And I think you got the last word here. So there's this big question on the table already, but then also, just what are you going to be watching as this race unfolds that's going to give some clarity about where New York City is heading, in these here be dragons waters in the years to come?
I mean, I don't even know where to begin with that. I will say Adams's team clearly, and this may all now be a moot point, but they clearly thought a pardon would be more politically beneficial than whatever is happening now. And they sought it almost immediately after Trump took office, and he clearly did not give it to them. I do think the political benefit of a pardon, to the extent that there is one, which there may no longer be, is just that it is a cleaner slate and it allows him to move forward. Whereas this court proceeding that continues with Clement and Ho and the possible hearing about it on March 14th, I mean, it's just dragging out in a way that can't help but be damaging to him.
Yep. And right after the Bove letter came out, Adams gave a speech, and then he didn't talk to the press for 2 weeks, basically.
3 weeks.
3 weeks, thank you, where he said his nightmare is over. It's time for us all to move on. He knows some people don't have confidence, but don't worry, he's gonna restore it. And plainly, that's not where we're at. That's the other C word: coercion, compulsion, commandeering, and confidence. That seems to continuously be in play now. Thank you again to the panelists, to Vital City, and to the Columbia Journalism School and Dean Cobb for putting this on. I'm glad that we got all these issues resolved and out of the way so that we can relax and just deal with the rest of our lives.
Thanks. Great to be with you all.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Pleasure. Thank you all. And thank you to listeners. Should I hang on here?